doctoral student at the School of Public Health here, and it is again my honor to introduce these folks to you. Each of them I know personally. We're going to skip lengthy introductions and instead kind of dive right in because we have a lot of questions that we want to hit and a lot of rich discussion that we want to have together. So I'll start with Chris Bolden-Newsome. Chris is on the end, and Chris and I used to work together at this organization in Philadelphia that focused on food education. It was a problematic organization in many ways. It was housed at the University of Pennsylvania and served primarily Black and brown youth, and the entire managerial team was white. Lon also I met working at that same organization, and we only overlapped very briefly, but we grew close, and Lon has touched my heart in many deep ways, and I'm honored to have her here today. And then next to Lon, we have Neftali Duran, who I met at, or I first heard Neftali speak at the NESOG conference. NESOG stands for the Northeast Sustainable Agricultural Working Group. They had a conference in Philadelphia, and Neftali was on a panel, and I just remember everything Neftali saying being so dynamic and important and critical for the food movement. And later on, Neftali spoke at South Philly Barbacoa, which is run by Christina. I don't know how many people know Christina, but she makes amazing tacos in Philadelphia, and is a real activist in the community around immigrant rights and food in the food system. So I heard Neftali speak there as well, and I worked up the courage to introduce myself. Next to Neftali is Liz Ogilvy. Liz I met at this meeting in Massachusetts, or Worcester specifically, and I learned about her work at Gardening the Community, and it was essentially a meeting of a lot of the organizations that do urban agriculture across Massachusetts, and I just remember Liz being so, just like everything she said was so powerful and so confident, and so just like I feel like she was unpacking these systems and did it in a way that was accessible and thoughtful, and I just was like, she has to be on this panel. So this is Liz. Today we'll be talking to you about food and land sovereignty and what that means, what that looks like for our various communities. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves.
You want us to stand?
No, you don't have to stand, but you should do something.
So I want to say, at least in my case, after those introductions, lower your expectations. We've just named ourselves the Chosen Colors, and I've moved from being the chosen black one over the years to the chosen black elder. So I'll try to restrain myself and behave in accord. I live in Springfield, and Chris and I have talked about this. Often when we speak, we talk about, we give you these stats, and so you're public health, and I'll give you a couple that will make you gasp. But I'm going to be really clear that I don't do my work from that place of trauma. So there are 10 McDonald's within a mile and 3/4 of my house and no grocery store. And 4 elementary schools and an early learning center, a Head Start, that can visually see the McDonald's and literally walk across the street and get food there, and no grocery store. And, I'm sorry?
Louder.
Oh, sure. I project generally well, but I'm a little scratchy because I have like 17 jobs and I'm kind of tired. I don't get paid for most of those, but you know, we all have our call. And one of the things that Ashley, she gave us some prep questions. She said, what led you to this work? And I've been working on poverty all of my adult life. And working on race, I didn't realize that I was working on race, thought I was just working on poverty. And none of it worked. Like, I built some affordable housing that 20 years later was the slums again. And built a grocery store that was there for about 15 years, and then Stop and Shop disinvested and left. And then worked on economic development projects that built some shopping strips that went from having strong anchor stores to dollar stores. And then I worked on workforce development. It finally occurred to me that, you know, this was really about undoing systemic racism, and I got really, really sad because now I'm in my 40s and wondering what I been doing with my life and spending lots of time on it. And then I became a mom really late in life via adoption and moved back home to Springfield, where I was from. And I was saying at lunch that there were two things that happen when you become a mother. There is this super force that like comes through you that, you know, we see these shows where people can lift a truck. But I also, my child is a half black, half Dominican boy, and in the same moment I felt incredibly powerless. And what went through my mind was, can I keep him alive? And then I took a deep breath and realized I probably could for at least a few years that I was able to hold him in my arms. But I wanted to look at like undoing systemic racism from a different lens. And I met some young kids who were working at Garden Community. And back then it was an agricultural garden project that taught kids how to farm in the city, and we were farming on empty lots. And I was really kind of thinking about leaving Springfield because I've been trying to organize people around quarry reform. And quarry, people are familiar with it. When you commit a crime afterwards, you have a criminal record, and it's quarry, and it follows you around, and you can't get jobs, and it was really unjust. And Neighbor to Neighbor did a really brilliant, amazing job with changing that. But in Springfield, you know, it's a third largest city, 250,000 folks, majority people of color, 65% Latino, 20%, it's probably like 90% people of color, 20% black. We have a Southeast Asian population that is treated as if they're invisible. And all leadership is white. At that time, we had an at-large city council, so only the white people voted it because only white people won. And Rise for Social Justice, another grassroots organization, changed that. So I met these kids who came to my door on a snowy day, and they were asking, like, where do you buy your food, and what do you feed your baby, and I just thought they were organizers, and so I was going to dig in with them no matter what. And now I use all this food terms. So now, 9 years later, I chair the Food Policy Council, and I chair Garden Community, and I sit on the Mass Farm to School Board, and we have land that we own where we built a farm stand, and we accept SNAP and HIP. Most of you probably know about the Healthy Incentive Program, and we feed 85 families on a regular weekly basis, and we have families deep in the hood that come and shop for non-sprayed produce. We don't say organic because we haven't gone to those certifications. Yeah, that deserves a thought. Even my Rihanna in my neighborhood, and through the work of the Food Policy Council, I got dug in on school food because I started volunteering to read in all the schools. It was my way of figuring out which elementary school to send my son to. And the food was just shitty. Excuse my French. Yes. And my husband would come home hungry every day. He was the assistant principal, and I figured out he was giving his lunches away to his kids. And I said, why are they getting free lunch? But the barrier to the free lunch application was huge. So I had to strong arm the neighbor to apply for community eligibility provision. And now we have 31,000 kids who eat breakfast and lunch for free. And the big evil empires of Exxon has become my friend because they suddenly make a lot more money. When you have that many kids in a school, just as if any of you are working in school food, our reimbursement budget is $117,000 a day. Now, I know some of you cook. Think about how many people we could feed and feed well with $117,000 a day, especially if we were growing your food. We have school gardens in 26 of our 60 gardens now. We have a salad bar in every single school. And we will open a brand new culinary nutrition processing center that costs $23.5 million, and we'll open that on April 12th. And it's a really longer story that I'm happy to tell any of you aside, but that was because that superpower mother stuff, I knew if I felt it, that every other mother, whether she spoke English or not, felt it, and that was the one place that we could begin to talk to people about food, and they were all people of color, and they all realized they were disenfranchised, and then they all were able to see the systemic, institutional, and personal mediated bias that exists in this racist construct that we live in. I have never ended on time before.
As the chosen brown person here in this panel. First of all, I'm really happy to see a lot of young people, but I'm also, every time we go to a conference, every time we speak at conferences, I always want to point out, where's the poor people, right? And in this case, we're talking about environmental justice. and the people who are impacted the most are never here, never at the table. So how do we change that? Some of the work that I do, right in the city next to Liz in Bolden, Massachusetts, but in general, I focus on indigenous foodways because I'm a migrant worker. I came to the U.S. as an undocumented teenager. 20 years later, many years later, I find myself being the chosen one, which is a good thing, but also it tells me how my people working in the fields, people feeding all of us, don't ever have a voice here. So that's super important for me to point out, and also, especially in the Northeast, where the indigenous folks are. I see one or two sisters here, but there's never representation. Some of the work that I'm interested in doing has to do with food justice, specifically food access. I don't think we can talk about food sovereignty or environmental justice without where people are going hungry in the U.S. And in the U.S., we don't have a problem with food. We have a problem with waste. And the reality is that we have a problem with morality. Right? We live in a system in which very few people hold most of the power and most of the resources, most of the money, and we believe that school, and not only do we believe that school, we make celebrities out of them, right? And listening to Claudia and Andrea, the injustice in the fields, the injustice in the kitchens, are going on all over the U.S. It's immoral that my brothers and sisters that work the fields have to go to the food pantry to be able to eat. When I think about environmental justice, when Ashley invited me to speak about to come to this panel, we already know that by 2050, by 2050, 75% of people will live in cities. We already know that. That means that there's going to be a mass migration of 3.1 billion people from countryside to the cities. And we can directly tie that to environmental injustices. Nobody just leaves their homeland. 3 million people don't just want to come to the U.S. or come to Europe. There has to be a reason why people leave their family, leave their communities, and migrate and risk their lives to go somewhere else, right? Right now, especially in this political climate, there's a lot of talk of the caravans coming to the U.S. and all this hate going on. The reality is that we can pinpoint droughts in Central America to people leaving their homeland, right? If you're living day to day as an indigenous person, as a person in Mexico, South and Central America, 1 year of drought, 1 year of crop failing means that you have nothing. Therefore, you have to do something about it. That to say that we are all responsible for it. The U.S. is the greatest threat to humanity, and we are all part of this problem. So how do we work together to change the system? Not only and I see this as part of I belong to the I Collective, which is an indigenous collective of indigenous chefs, seed keepers, knowledge keepers, hunter-gatherers. And the work we're trying to understand is how we empower our own communities to do work at different levels. Grassroots organizing is fantastic, and we love doing that. But we also have to think about take the system head on. We have to work on policy. We have to work on creating movements. We have to work on solidarity with other movements. And that is easier said than that. And we have to start thinking about it. We have to start thinking about everything we do in a holistic way. Yes, there's no perfect solution to this issue, but we have to work. We have to come up with solutions that work. And I think that it is sadly it is up to young people to take this on. And I have faith. I have faith that the young people will lead us through this. But also, the most disenfranchised people in the world, at the front lines of environmental injustices, are indigenous people. And we have to make sure that those voices are at the table and those voices are leading. Because people, indigenous people around the world are being targeted and assassinated every day for fighting for the environment, fighting for all of us. We have to make sure that we do everything we can to follow the lead of indigenous leaders.
My family came over to the U.S. as refugees in 1990. As the sister said earlier, in whatever space that we had, we grew. So you can see myself and my mom and my parents, and they're growing Vietnamese jute, which you can't find anywhere. Like, you can't buy this at the store. You literally have to grow it. And they brought these seeds over in their voyage when they came over. And it's interesting, when I got older and the urban ag movement started emerging, and I was looking at it, and I was looking at my parents. I was like, oh, well, you know, those gardens, that's what my parents do, but we're doing it to survive. This isn't some trendy urban ag thing. This is what urban ag actually looks like. Is families, most of the time, families of color who have to grow their own food because they can't get their food in stores, and especially if it's cultural food. And many times our food might be illegal to grow. So, Ashley mentioned this earlier, I was working in an organization that was working primarily in the Black community, and it was super problematic in terms of the white admin, but also that was a time that I questioned for myself, what is my positionality as an Asian woman? What does it look like for me to work towards my own liberation? What does it look like for me to organize in my own community? And so this is when, in 2015, I co-founded a grassroots organization called VietLead. And our work is around organizing the Viet community in Philadelphia and South Philly. Philly and South Philly, the house? Philly and South Philly. So our work is organizing our community towards self-determination. Very much so inspired by the Black Panthers of utilizing direct services to meet our community where they're at, our community is in poverty and needing basic assistance. And while we are building that trust and those relationships, how are we then creating spaces that when we talk about real structural change and actually move our community towards social justice? Okay, so some of our work is working with home gardens. So I guess a little background too of the Vietnamese community. So, you know, we came over as displaced people because of American imperialism. And within that, we were then resettled in resource-poor areas, oftentimes being pitted against Black neighbors. And that is why there's huge Black-Asian tension. We actually do work around this in Philly. And so, you know, we must remember these institutional causes of trauma. And a sister earlier said this as well. And at the same time, point to the ways our community was resilient because we had to respond to that. And a lot of the ways that our community found resilience and healing was through growing. As displaced people, finding our very own healing and reconnecting to another land, reconnecting to another home. So we have our community farm. We are led by our elders, who we work to heal intergenerationally between elders and young people, between different South and Southeast Asian solidarity. We got a lot of shit in our own communities, y'all. So before we can build solidarity with other communities of color, we gotta work on ourselves. So this I wanted to rush to this. This is a really helpful framework offered by Movement Generation. It's called the Just Transition Framework, which really names things. So one of the work that we do too is political education. We have to reclaim what our history was and actually uncover what was done to our communities so that can never happen again. And we must actually expose and name white supremacy, patriarchy, and extractive economies. So this is, you know, really breaking down what exactly is happening. Okay, so in our political education with our young people, we're talking about extraction of resources. If, you know, starting from colonialism of Vietnam, that's a rubber Michelin dude, and that is why Vietnam was colonized by the French, because of the Ford car industry in the U.S. that's happening at the same time. So talking about internationalism, right? How that economy is affecting us globally. We talk about extraction resources. We talk about exploitation of labor, starting with enslavement of Africans, and leading to importation of Asian labor in Hawaiian plantations, to current day exploitation of Latinx labor, and also policy. Break down that policy. So 1930, this was the law that laid the groundwork for today, where farm workers and domestic workers, which at the time were primarily Black women, were excluded from federal labor laws. The purpose of our extractive economy right now is wealth and the enclosure of power. We can look at the Farm Bill and talk about how that laid the groundwork for the rise of corporations and the loss of small farms. And how is this extractive economy enforced? Militarism and the police. So let's not forget that the police was created to protect white land, and how that has led to the schools to prison pipeline, the refugee to deportation pipeline. Okay, so after we do political education, we also organize. So we do a lot of campaign building. I will say that we recently started to build a school garden. We found that there was flood in the area. Our students led a campaign that won $130,000 to clean the lead in the area. But the students didn't stop there. They're like, well, if there's lead outside, there's lead in the school. So you give us a little more money. So they're actually forging a fight to fix the lead in their school and all the schools in Philadelphia. And how we're doing that, we look through all the policies that create money for schools. And the number one that we did at People's Assembly in our community, and the community voted for us to attack the tax abatement, which allows 10-year tax abatement for new developers and property improvement. So imagine 10 years of properties aren't being paid, that aren't going to schools. So right now we have a community mandate to end it. I'm just wrapping up. Reconnecting to land, political education, and campaign building is what we do in our work. But at the very root of it, we know that our entry point and the healing point is land, and how important food and land play a role.
Go behind all these awesome closer? Okay. Well, first giving honor and glory to my Creator, and to the power that moves through the universe and connects all things. And then to our ancestors, to our grandmothers, our grandfathers, to all those folks who have returned their bodies and their work to the soil to which we're all connected. I want to invite all of our righteous dead into this space and into this conversation. We move forward by looking back. I want to greet and just also show my honor for being on this panel with these awesome, awesome people, my heroes. Sorry, that close enough. It's gonna almost be in my mouth. Okay. So I'm very, very, very glad to be up here with these folks. I've learned so much already just from all of them, so thank you. I also want to give a shout out too to in the event that we are actually doing anything that's productive and powerful here, that there should be spies and plants in the space and in the room, and so I want to greet them too. That they have to be here. This is Harvard, maybe the whole place is a plant. You know. And thanks so much to Ashley too for this wonderful opportunity, pulling it all together. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today too, is really about relationships. And this young sister was able to leverage her relationships. She didn't go through agencies and contact, call around and that sort of thing. She knew and had a relationship with us, with each and every one of us, right? And we had helped in some way to form her consciousness in this work. And so when she moved to a place where she had access to resources and ears to hear, then she put us on. And that's what we do, right? If we actually really want to get this movement going. So I just want to lift that up. I'm Chris Bolden-Newsome of the Sons. I'm going to read a little bit from my paper, y'all, in order to keep me on track, too. So I don't usually do that. I'll be looking from time to time at that. But I'm Chris Bolden-Newsome, the son of farmers, Rufus and Imelda of Washington County, Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta, and we are the fourth generation of free farmers in our family since emancipation. And I was called to this work through a very winding path. I did not expect, like most folks, most black folks, I would say probably, I think within my rights to say most black folks generally don't look at farming in this country as something that we're going to go into. Certainly not very few parents that I can count, unless they're actually farming parents, who still have their land, which is not our case in terms of having our land still, are actually directing their children into this direction. So that's the route that I came through. I came through a family that had already done this and that had roots in the Mississippi Delta, particularly around growing food under the hostile conditions of segregation and Jim Crow and all of that. And so my winding path took me to the East Coast. And I ended up working in Washington, D.C., did a little time at Howard University, and got some connections, some information. I think one thing that occurred to me and that really maybe helped to push me in this direction was I was a Southerner, and I took for granted, and might even have disparaged, definitely did disparage, the customs that I've grown up with, our foods. Like many people, raise your hand if that's the case from you, if you're from a family that kept its cultural traditions and maybe you got older and didn't think that they were so important or didn't think they were so exciting, right? At some point, right? There's been a lot of our stories too, and that's one of the ways that it happens, I think. But what I noticed around me is that African Americans in the North who were almost universally, if they were American born, North American born, universally originated from the South and had come up through these migrations, had lost this connection, right? This is not something we talk a lot about. It's not something that figures a lot into what a black Chicagoan thinks of himself as, or what a black Philadelphian thinks of herself as, though she may be removed only 1 to 2 generations from farming and from the soil, right? So as my designated black elder and I in our conversation was telling me, what we have to recognize is that when we still have that legacy, that we carry that land with us, right? And I think this is the legacy of diasporic people, who've had to move and have been moved for so many ways and so many times, is that we have to carry that land with us, and part of doing that is to maintain the relationships, maintain the stories. The work that we do, and I am co-director at Sankofa Community Farm in Bartram's Garden. It's located at the site of one of America's first white men, The Bartram's Garden is a historical botanical garden, first in British North America. And at that farm we do intergenerational work with our elders in the community, those who are closer to that connection of land, with the young people as well. I work with about 12 high schoolers, and we do this work on about 3.5 acres of land that we have. We've created and established a unique partnership with Bartram's Garden, wherein we are independent on the land, and they are assisting us with fiscal sponsorship, and we have opened up the space, the programming, and funding, frankly, as a result of it, to the neighborhood that's right there. That's right, previously is odd and shocking ideas. This wonderful refuge of 40 clear acres in Southwest Philadelphia, which is the hood, by the way, was something that most black folks who lived there didn't know was there or didn't think welcomed them, right? And so it's been a blessing to be able to enter into this unique partnership, and I hope that other people can do the same thing with landholders, right? It is a method of reparations. It is a method of moving forward. It is a method of reducing the spiritual debt and burden upon the children of the power class by doing this work of starting to return some of this to people in some way. So we are a spiritually rooted farm, which means that we actively employ prayer, ritual, ancestral story, other practices, wisdom practices with regard to food and how we prepare it. And so we teach our young people all of this within the context of where they are in Philadelphia as a diasporic people. So what we're doing with our young people through the work of our elders in the community, like Miss Emma and Miss Hazel, Miss Pearlie, all of these people, who have all of this information, they're sitting up in retirement. They won't be with us forever. Our elders won't be with us. And when they're gone, in terms of the knowledge, y'all. And I have news for a lot of us. A lot of the stuff that makes us up who we are, I'm talking about indigenous people, I'm talking about black folks in this country, I'm talking about other people who come from intact cultures that they're holding on to or have some connection to still. A lot of that stuff ain't on the internet, y'all, and I'm glad it ain't, right? But what it means is that it's in our heads, it's in the libraries of our elders and of our friends in these relationships. So I know that I'm being called to wrap up, and I just want to emphasize that, that the work really revolves around relationships. It revolves around maintaining those relationships that extend beyond the grave. So we invite our ancestors in this space. They extend over water and over land and across time and to our next door neighbors, right? Important to keep them up. And I want to wrap up by including some of the words of one of my colleagues and coworkers and mentees / mentors, a young woman who was getting to this farm. And by the way, too, y'all, young farmers that's the cutting edge right now. Young folks are wanting to get into farming. It's a reverse of the scriptural adage that the harvest is many, but the laborers are few, right? We got a lot of laborers. We don't have a lot of places to do the harvest right now, or access to be able to do it, right? And so this young woman, I've been blessed to be able to bring on and work with it. She says that my mental health is what called me to the land. Her name is LaQuanda Dobson. She says that, and I knew that the land would help me. She says that what will keep me on the land. And y'all listen to this, because I can hear echoes of Mama Fannie Lou Hamer in this. I hear echoes of Baba George Carver and these other people. She says that a living wage, free land for me and my family, education, the way we as black people need it, right? Stories about the world and our stories about ourselves. Free message and wellness centers, okay? Stress-free working environment. Funding for cooking and gardening classes, paid travel to other farmers across the U.S. to help other farmers across the U.S. And, of course, free farm clothes for each season. It's a tall order, y'all, but this is the richest country on the planet. And for now, and at least I think we can do it. So thank y'all so much.
That was amazing. Thank you all for your presentations. And I'd like to just jump right in and ask some hard questions that might leave some folks feeling uncomfortable, might not. We will see where it goes. So, in Dr. White's book, an earlier keynote address today, she talked about a theoretical framework known as collective agency and community resilience. Specifically, she describes it as encompassing everyday forms of resistance and says, But even the study of everyday forms of resistance misses activities that are not disruptive, but rather constructive, in the sense that the aggrieved actively build alternatives to existing political and economic relationships. Similarly, the field of environmental health tends to focus more on disparities and harmful exposures, and less on those that are beneficial and solutions-driven. Can you speak to how your work focuses on the constructive aspects of resistance and solutions to health inequities?
You know, I have so many thoughts. First thought is, I need to get Chris a pulpit, because we could just raise some money the way he preaches. So Neftali and I are also a part of an organization called Northeast Farmers of Color, NEFAC, which was birthed out of Soulfire Farm. Our sister friend, Leah Penniman, who is, how many ancestors reincarnated? How many people know Leah Penniman? She is farming and teaching others to farm and talking about race in a way that calls people in with hard love, but lifts us all up. When I put my hands in the soil, I hear the whispers of my grandmothers. So, and Neff's grandmothers, and Lon's grandmothers, and this is a 400-year bus, and for those of you who are here may have seen this in the Boston Globe. They are really illuminating that it's 2020 is the 400th anniversary of the landing at Plymouth. And when I saw that, you know, I had to lay down, because white people were just so happy, and I'm like, and because I'm so close to Neff now, you know, I'm thinking about indigenous people and what that means for them. And then realizing that this is the 400th anniversary of when those from whom I descend first landed on the shores down south. And it shows you how colonialized I am. The first thought was, I knew I'd been here longer than most of the white people. And that's just the reality. And I don't want to be in that space, because I don't feel, you know, as an American, I don't walk through this space that this land is more mine than Lon's or Neff's or anybody else. But this land is mine, it is ours. And so my constructive work is really embedded in, I want a grocery store, but I'm not going to wait on a damn grocery store. I'm going to grow food. And GTC is going to grow food, and we're going to figure out ways to sell it or give it to as many people as possible. And I'm growing school gardens, and the white people think I'm growing school gardens so I can teach science education in a non-traditional way and expose children to this lovely produce. But I'm growing a school garden so my kids can take home collard greens and black beans and the things they need to eat. And because I have a long-term goal of having this neighborhood that I'm working in declared an agricultural district, because we are all people of color living there who have a history and a connection to agriculture. And we need a reframe. You know, I use the word hood, but we're going to be an agri-hood. And so I think, you know, I think about white people. Unfortunately, I was educated, but I don't, you know, I've reached a point in my life where I don't let white people's opinions of me inform the way that I walk. But as young white people, I want, particularly young white people in the School of Public Health, I want you to think about how you're educated and where you're educated, and a constructive thing that could happen at this university that needs to happen in northern universities, because we think that the construct of racism is embedded in slavery and it all happened in the South. And sitting here, I was educated at the Divinity School here, and I have to remind people that it was Northern banks who financed the trade, okay? It was Northern insurance companies who insured the boats and the cargo. And when I said that recently, a young white woman said, oh, there were other cargo? And I said, no, I was the cargo. And that's really important to call up and lift out. And when Lon talked about folks bringing seeds, I think of Leah's stories when she tells us of how we brought seeds. And so I think those are all very constructive, that have nothing to do with white people or the system of racism, but have all to do with us and what can we do in that context.
I think that as Liz and I work together, it's really important for me to recognize how much Liz pushed me, and other people pushed me to work from to remind myself to do this work from a place of joy and from a place of not from a place of trauma. The reality is that as a flawed human, I use anger as the fuel to action, to do any actions. That's how I operate. But one of the things that I think that talking about relationship building and solidarity, it's super important to recognize that. For me to recognize, and I truly believe, as I work with Liz, as I work with Lee, as I work with other folks, there's a reason why we don't talk to each other, and there's a reason why we don't work together, right? And it's embedded in colonialism, and it's embedded in white supremacy. We've been told for many hundreds of years that we're not supposed to like each other, and we're not supposed to work together. I personally see the work of decolonizing myself as part of this proactive approach to do this work in a way that is more constructive. And what that means for me in my everyday life and in my reality is that I, like many indigenous people, did not value my roots, my ancestors until I moved to Massachusetts, but that was in 2003. You know, being away from my community, when I came to the US, I lived in Los Angeles, in West Los Angeles particularly, and it's a really small, close-knit Oaxacan community. Coming to Western Massachusetts, being a mostly white space, made me realize how powerful it is to be part of the Oaxacan community, the Oaxacan diaspora, the indigenous community. And it really made me start searching for my roots, and I've been on that quest ever since. And what that means for me is actually not only valuing myself, my ancestors, my sisters, my family, but also accepting a lot of the negative ideas that I've had about myself and my peoples. It's rooted in colonialism. Nowadays in the work that we're doing, it's really finding solutions that are mostly outside of the norm. How do we build movements? How do we build organizations? Not in the traditional way that we've been doing. How do we build a food justice movement and an environmental justice movement because we believe in it, not because there's a grant, right? So I'm gonna stop right there.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, because I think you both spoke to it so beautifully, of creating spaces where we can decolonize ourselves and really, really claim the joy and dignity in our own community and the gifts of our ancestors. And so I know for myself, I have been on this quest of just reading and like learning a lot more about what did the farmers of my ancestors teach me. Before I was going over kind of the history, I think it's really important that we do have a political economic analysis of our history, and at the same time, we need to know the histories that our communities provided, and lift that up as well. So I just want to reiterate that and reiterate the simple and profound constructive act, I feel, and revolutionary of reconnecting to land. As people who have been displaced and exploited, as exploited labor, for us, the very act of us reconnecting to land, of putting our hands in the soil, of listening to our ancestors and other ancestors, how deeply moving and profound that act is for our healing.
And I would add, for Black people, we have to remind ourselves that the trauma happened on the land. It is not in the land, and the land was traumatized by what was happening on her. Mother Earth is the reason that I think those pictures show what you can grow in buckets, right? And if you look, we have broadsides, you would see that the same lushness, I think the soil has been waiting for us. I think it calls us, and I think we need to push through whatever fear or trauma we have. When I joined GTC, I had manicures and wore pantyhose, and my husband said, "Do you even own pantyhose anymore? I haven't seen your legs for like 8 years. All you wear are overalls." But he also recognizes that I am so filled with joy in a way. And my son is watching his mother, because now I have a huge, we're talking about size of what we grow. And Dr. Monica mentioned her 7 acres, and the people down south say, "Oh, baby." And then when Chris talked about 3.5 acres, Neff and I were like, "Wow, we got a lot of land." So it's all relative, right? And demonstrating for our neighbors. I live in a neighborhood that's majority Latino because the city has shifted that way. And I grow cilantro, and I grow calabaza, and it is my way of saying to my neighbors, I see you, and I honor you, and I respect you, and I'm calling you in. And I didn't know what I was doing when I planted these squash, and so they were growing all over the sidewalk. And so, literally all over the sidewalk. My husband said, "There's some strange looking watermelons on the sidewalk. I think we're gonna get in trouble." Because I don't have a fence, because that whole paradigm of a fence. And people say, "Oh, they're gonna steal your food." Well, you can't steal food. And it's not mine. Somebody gave me some seeds, and I put it in this soil that doesn't belong to me, so it's their food. But Latinos were coming and picking up the calabaza and putting it back into the garden and saying, "Oh, Mija, you did this wrong." But that is, in a very micro way, I am building community in a way that when I set up a table and say, "Let's come eat some of this stuff together in the yard," and people come, and then we begin to have these conversations about the broader constructs.
So my next couple of questions will focus on the principles of environmental justice as outlined at the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991. So Principle 7 says, environmental justice demands the right to participate as equal partners at every level of decision-making, including needs assessment, planning, implementation, enforcement, and evaluation. And Principle 13 says, environmental justice calls for the strict enforcement of principles of informed consent and a halt to the testing of experimental reproductive and medical procedures and vaccinations on people of color. Thinking about how these principles intersect with environmental health and public health research, can you share how your work and your communities have been impacted by researchers, either positively or negatively, and how has that shaped your interactions with researchers moving forward?
Well, that's a salient question, particularly for me and for our farm, because we came out of the country's arguably first research institution, largest first research institution. Is that beach between Harvard and Penn? We don't care. So that's a real interesting sort of notion. I think over the years, certainly as here's what you got to think about it. Black folks and other colored people working in the land and reclaiming and doing this powerful. I love that question, by the way, the last one. I just wasn't ready for it, but I might touch on it a little bit in his response. That when you do that kind of constructive, like resistance, I guess for lack of a better word, growing a garden, telling your stories, teaching your songs, praying your prayers, when you do that sort of thing, and pass that on, I think it has become interesting to the dominant culture, to white people. I think it's an interesting historical moment. I don't like to try to parse what's going on in the hearts and the minds of white America too much. When I start doing that, I think I'm taking energy away from the massive amount of work that we need to do. But something interesting, I think is happening. I don't think it's exactly the same phenomenon that's going on, for years. But I think that the great attention being given to our cultural recovery movements and anything, that's related to that, It's a real tricky notion for us. What it has looked like is we get a lot of interns who want to spend some time, and they want, and sometimes it can be pretty aggressive. No, honestly, sometimes it can be an aggressive sort of, I called you 3 times, sir, and I left you an email, and it's like, I'm farming. Excuse me. You left me an email? Are you helping me? Am I helping you? So it's this sort of notion. So that's one point that it is taking repeat. We had to learn that first we took folks, and there was tension because part I didn't talk about our genesis of my farm was that, as you know, I co-direct with a young white man, Tyler Holmberg, who I'll shout out, and our journey towards actually doing this work, because he was hired first, our journey to actually doing this work has also been a journey of discovery around these issues of race, around what's caught and what's taught. I'm a 41-year-old man, but this child who's 6-7 years my junior, I think I was automatically programmed to believe he was my boss, and he was programmed to believe I was working. Nobody ever said that, right? But in this research institution with its installed and in place hierarchy, and honestly, sort of, with all of that, and with the weight of education and all of that that comes behind it, I didn't finish my degree, elevated as opposed to, that's what we call it Harvard. If you didn't leave with a degree, elevated, you graduate, right? And so, I did, so all of these notions are like in the background around us, even when we know that we have the information, we got the power, we got the access, we have the relationships, and more than anything of that, we have the power of still knowing enough of who we are, at least that much a lot of us still have, in terms of cultural, deep-rooted kind of, so I think that's interesting, and for us, it has meant learning how to be selective and to recognize that when folks come and they want to research and they want to do something, we're very critical. In fact, what that has looked like, it's extended beyond even just researchers wanting to pick your brain or get information or whatever it is, right? It means also 2 people who walk up on our land, we're in a unique partnership with the land. I have a fence on our land. I have a fence on our land on purpose for lots of reasons. But one of the things is that so that folks who are not from the community know that before you walk up on this space, you need to talk to somebody. We got to spiritually invest in space. We do. We pray over our land every day. We make libations and offerings seasonally in our space. So, and we're training, we're working with young people and old people and vulnerable population. You can't just walk up on my farm and walk in. So all of that extends, I think even farther that we have to be a little bit more judicious and careful about who is in our space. And then when you're coming to help, if you're actually coming out, I love that quote, I wish you could see it because it's some of the good that you had. If you're coming to help, you're wasting your time. But if you're coming because your liberation is bound up in my liberation, then let's sit down and do the thing. So that's for me, and as close as you can get to that, as you want to do a project that at some end is going to benefit us ultimately, I'll take that too, and let God move you forward for the rest of it. So I just think it means about being more selective, being who you are, and just going deeper every day.
I want to talk about researchers. Well, for me, so I'm going to put it this way. In Western Massachusetts, as many of you know, we have 5 colleges, right? And doing community work, there's always these aggressive people asking you to take their kids. We have to say it out loud. Education is an extractive industry, right? Careers are made on extracting knowledge from our communities and becoming the experts, right? And then telling us about our history, right?
Say that one more time.
Careers are made, doctorates are achieved by extracting the knowledge from our community and then telling us our story, right? How do we change that? We change that in many different ways, but first of all, universities have to pay communities if you want us to educate your kids. Because that's really what we're doing. That's really where they want to come. And I tell students this all the time. You come when you want to learn something. You never come back when you're an engineer, a doctor,
right.
a lawyer. You never come back.
That's right.
Right? So what is it, so how do we change that? And we change that by actually building relationships with people at these universities to understand where I'm coming from. In this case, in Western Massachusetts, I started doing work with, in the last few years with Smith College, and our 2 interns, they worked with us, actually did amazing work, and I moved on to great things. But not only did they learn from us, we learned from them, and we built a relationship that is going to last a lifetime. That's what we need to do. The other thing, talking about people becoming experts, right, and building relationships, and being in solidarity with one another. I speak publicly a lot about culinary appropriation, right? Because being from Oaxaca and coming from indigenous communities, one of the last things we have is our food. Some of us, some people in my community still have their language and food. The last 2 things we lose before we lose our identity, right? People in the U.S. Until very recently, all of the experts in Oaxacan food were white, right? Yesterday I read a story in the San Francisco Chronicle. The title is Thomas Keller's new Oaxacan restaurant is cultural appropriation done right. It gets worse. It gets worse. It was written by a nation sister. And this is why relationship building is important, and maintaining community relationships. Because I hope that at some point in my lifetime we knew each other. We knew each other enough in our communities to literally call someone and say, like, "Come get your girl." Yeah.
A friend of ours, her name is Misty Smith. She runs the Black Land Project, and she recently wrote a piece, "White People Come Get Your Children." She was talking about something else. She was actually talking about the young white man who faced off with the indigenous elder and then tried to say, reframe it, and his parents hired a $10,000 public relations guy to coach him. And so, community-based participatory research. Bless your hearts. Because I worked for the Public Health Institute of Western Mass, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to me because I got a mini public health education. But it was also heartbreaking because I saw that while they were talking about dismantling racism, they were some of the strongest mortar in it. Because when you say the word community, if I'm not sitting with you at the table when you start to design this research, it is flawed. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot that I want to put on the students here, and if there's any faculty in the room, we scared them off. One brave soul will even out himself. So, public health in particular, I think it's needed across the academy. We have got to start with Undoing Racism 101. Because white people don't even want to call themselves white. So if some of you are thinking of yourselves as Irish or Italian or French, if you are not speaking those languages at home, if you didn't just recently arrive here, that may be your cultural descent. You may have some traditions attached to it. But if you live in America, and I use that word only because we haven't come up with a new one yet, and your skin is white and your hair, even if it's curly, but done in a way that makes it clear that it's not necessarily people of color curly, you are white. And you have got to figure out what whiteness means before you can begin to do any kind of public health work or you will be a poor researcher. You will do all these things that they've all lifted up. You'll drive us crazy, because I get those same calls from interns. I have had interns cut and paste things from Soulfire Farm's website, email it to me and say, and we really want to talk to you about what does it mean to be food apartheid, because we've been thinking about this. And then email me over and over again until they or call me until they accidentally catch me. And I had this conversation last week, and I said, so how long have you been thinking about what food apartheid means? And there was just this silence. I said, so I'm going to guess as long as you read it on Soulfire Farm's website and cut and pasted in the email that you sent to me. And these are students from Smith. And they said, well, we want to really talk about our impact in the food system and what we can do, and so we want to come to Springfield. And we're two white women and we don't know where to start. And I said, start with the young people of color who are on your campus. Well, I don't think they're thinking about it. And I said, I assure you, if there are black women walking around on the campus of Smith, they are thinking about it. Well, wouldn't it be easier for us to come to Springfield? I said, it would be easier for you, but not for me. And then I called their professor, because we've developed this relationship, and I did say, come get your children. And send them back to me when they're really ready to engage in community-based participatory research. So as you are embarking on it or learning about it, you've got to ask some hard questions. You have a responsibility. Being at this institution is the key to the castle. You will work wherever you want to work when you graduate with this degrees. You will design things, and you need to decide, are you going to, and I'm going to use the word atone. You have a responsibility to atone for the privilege that has been exerted on your family for however many generations since they became white, and that takes like 5 minutes after you get here, right? So you get to inform and shape, and if you want to inform and shape this work, the best place to start is right where you are and right with your own. And I mean with your own, I mean even with your friends, with your classmates, in your house, with your parents. Now, you have to go home for the holidays, so you have to do this gently, because I'm not taking you in on Thanksgiving. I already got my fair share. But I'm being serious. Like, don't just be here. Engage. And I really want to lift up Ashley, because to be a person of color in these predominantly white institutions breaks my heart. It is not any easier than it was when I was here 20 years ago. And we are all complicit in that. And we all need to take some responsibility in that. And so think about that. Think about that. Think about how many people of color do you know in your classes? How many people of color do you speak with? How many people of color do you ask, what can you teach me today?
I do want to say, once we build relationships, and I just remember this. Once we build relationships, there are ways of working together. In the Harvard Food and Law Lab, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, they've done some work for us.
And some of them are here, aren't they? Did they leave? Or are they right here? Okay.
But in any case, the work that we've done together came out of mutual respect, and out of the understanding that we have to use the resources of institutions like this to fight the system.
There's one last thing I want to throw up about the universities and the research. But in addition to being vigilant about who gets in and what exactly the project will be benefiting, I want us also to think too about what the project is too. I want to lift up, because we are at Harvard University, a research institution, and also the interest right now in ag, especially in urban ag, is something that also is a route for these for universities and other entities and institutions to test out and to use some of the new technological innovations, I think, that are going in. So I really want to address that, because I don't hear many farmers talking about it. I think we take it, I had a situation where, we were working with a very large internet provider in our area, who decided that after a few years of us working with them working with us and doing volunteer work and doing wonderful things to sort of help us, that then it was time for them to move in and put sensors in our field to tell us when it was time to water, right? Or when it was, my grandmother did that with her finger, right? And so, again, I think that many farmers, probably depending on where we are, might, in our situation, if that comes with a $50,000 check and a small farmer, you might say, well, it's a sensor. What is it? It's a drone. It's the Internet of Things. It's whatever it is. So I do want to also have us to think about, having control of our spaces and having control of our stories also means that being vigilant about what we allow into the space, particularly as a project, and not to just sort of be swayed by what sounds super exciting and shiny, because that's hurt us before in our past.
So I have time for one more question before we open it up to the audience Q&A. And I wish we could spend more time on this question because it is an important one. But the panelists could maybe limited to about 2 minutes to a response. What are the ways in which you are growing food and building community, considering the damage and drastic degradation that is being done to the climate, environment, and our people?
So at Resilient Roots, we are incorporating no-till, which means we are trying not to, till the soil, believing that the natural microorganisms and the soil life is also about reconnecting with the soil life and trusting that the work is happening, and that we as humans are just supporting the work that's already happening in the soil. So we are incorporating no-till. We are trying to incorporate some natural fertilizing too, which is a part of Vietnamese tradition and also in other cultures. We're trying to save seed, as many folks on this panel are. And and saving seed and growing the seed in our climate that it actually adjusts to our climate. And then each year the plants are actually growing healthier. And as the climate changes, it is adapting with it. We're doing and we're growing as our ancestors, so natural methods. And I'll just leave it to that for 2 minutes.
I want to reiterate too what Sister said. I mean, a lot of those practices when put together refer loosely to a type of agriculture. It has a name. Everything has to have a name today, right? To what folks and many people refer to as natural farming. We also practice, which is apparently different from natural agriculture in terms of the terminology. I don't know. So it was what our grandparents did, right? It's what our great-grandparents did. And I think that for us, what that's looked like, so all of those definitely no till. Because what all this means, y'all, is that when you're doing tilling, let's break it down, we're not working in the land. You're constantly tilling and turning over. You're not only doing damage and absolutely disrespecting the myriad of sacred relationships with the beings in the soil who are part of you and to whom you will return, right? You're resetting that whole clock for them. Because see, when you do that deep tilling, it looks beautiful, right? I can put my hand all the way to the elbow in the soil, right? People think that's a great thing, it's a beautiful thing, but what that literally means is that you have destroyed universes of creatures that are supposed to be there doing their wonderful work. Everybody knows what they have to do and what they're supposed to do except for us, as human beings for some reason. And so that's what that means, to do no-till, right? That you're not unleashing all the carbon that's been stored into the soil through your other natural practices. You felt good about composting and all that stuff. Then you go and do a deep till, it just all comes up like a spirit. It goes into the atmosphere, right? And so we employ that practice, but also growing the traditional food. The power of growing your traditional foods is, y'all, many of the foods, traditional foods, I can speak for my own people, originating from West and Central Africa. Our foods are resilient. The plants are resilient. I know this also too from my interaction with my sister Lon about foods of the Asian diaspora, specifically Southeast Asian diaspora. These plants are resilient. They grow in areas that have been destroyed and decimated, like us. They're not trauma-focused, trauma-informed. They're resilience and healing-informed and healing-focused, right? And so a black-eyed pea can grow in drought-like conditions, right? In fact, it only gets better by remembering, as my sister said, the conditions in the previous summer. That's why you save your seeds. First of all, keep it out of the hands of Monsanto and other entities, and Bayer and all those folks. But you do it also to keep the memory, so it sees what's going on. It keeps a better record than any census, y'all, of what's happening to the planet, and to the ground, right? So I want to emphasize those practices that seem like, this is why they're so important, y'all. If done right, they will help to save us, right? You save your seed, that's resilient. We grow out more species that are used to really drastic sort of environmental situations. Figure out what those are. Chances are your ancestry already provides some of that.
I think that that's one thing that we need to start doing. If we seed keeping traditional ways of farming, and specifically indigenous farming, is one of the most important things we need to support if we're going to survive as humans. The amount of knowledge in indigenous communities will save us. There's a place in Arizona called Ajo. It's the Tohono Nation. They grow food there, and it gets to up to 120 degrees. Their way of growing food is super important. It's amazing that you can grow food at that temperature, right? And as you said, the seed remembers. So we need to stop. We need to stop supporting cute organizations that are mostly white-led or white-run, and we have to start investing in indigenous people's farms.
And you can grow food anywhere. I have a lot next to my house that I was thinking of as a big little mini farm. I have 12 rows that are 40 feet long, and that 40 feet is intentional to remind me what we were promised and didn't get. And I grow the traditional foods that I know, but I also grow traditional foods of other cultures. Because it's my way of calling people in. And the Food Policy Council works for a couple of reasons. It is legitimatized me to some degree with the white folks, because I'm working on policy change and systems change. And it's a way for them to get rid of city lots that nobody wants. They're not big enough to build anything on, and they're just problematic for the city. So I had a number of experiences where young people would get off, there's a bus stop where my lot is, they would get off the bus and say things to me. And one day, a Latino man got off the bus and he said, "Oh my gosh," and then he just stood there. And a black man got off, who I know a little bit from the neighborhood. He said, "It's mid-season, everything's lush and beautiful." And he said, "I feel like I'm in my grandmama's garden. There's a lot of stuff I don't recognize, but it still feels like my grandmother's garden." And this Latino man said, "Oh, Poppy, no, this is Puerto Rico." And I burst into tears because, really, I'm just an old lady in the community who wants everybody to love each other and to undo these barriers that have been put up between us. But then they both came into the garden and started telling me what I could do better. They didn't say what you did wrong. They said, "What can you do better?" And so I call that out. So in these lots that nobody wants, I've gone and knocked on the next door neighbor's door and said, "If I do the work and pay for it, would you let me run a spout down from your gutter into a water barrel so we can use it to grow food on this land, and in exchange, we'll let you have some of the food." And nobody, we have 17 lots like that now, and nobody has said no. And the black and Latino man, we formed an organization. They are still working their jobs. They never spoke to each other on that bus they've been riding for 11 years before this garden was here. And now they work with 7 young black men who have decided I can't get a job, so I might as well be doing something, who are growing food. And I had to grow my own farmers for my farmer's market because white folks don't want to come to Springfield because they don't think we buy vegetables and they don't want to sell to us. And I'm like, okay, I could spend a lot of time begging you to come, or I could come up with another strategy.
Yes. I also want to highlight that a lot of the research that comes out that talks about what you can do in terms of farming and growing food that will mitigate climate change are things that farmers of color are already doing and have been doing for a long time, such as no-till farming, planting tree crops, things of that nature. So I just want to thank all of the panelists for all of the knowledge and wisdom that they shared with us today. And I'd also like to open it up to the audience. We only have time for one question. Do I see? I don't see any hands. Okay, it looks like there's one question right here.
So I'd like to ask each participant, Did any of your grandparents ever take vitamins?
Not mine.
None. So they got all their vitamins from food.
My grandmother used to drink pot liquor. She felt like she was going to get sick. People know what
So
pot liquor is?
My grandmother used to eat dirt.
Red dirt, in Alabama, you eat a little bit of red dirt.
So my point, this is an observation. My wife's favorite expression is, I'd rather spend my money in the supermarket than in the drugstore. And if you had good nutrition, you weren't going to get any chronic diseases.
Right.
If you go to CVS or Walgreens today, you see shelves and shelves of over-the-counter vitamins and supplements, which are making the pharmaceutical companies very, very rich. Because your grandparents got all their nutrition from food. And so that's just my observation. I'll just let it go at that.
I wanna respond briefly to that. We have to be a little bit careful about this, especially thinking about my indigenous sisters. They are malnourished, working in the fields. We have to be a little bit careful with the way we think. Yes, my grandma didn't take any vitamins, but as we know, as we live in the system, people of color are going to live less than white people. That's the reality. We know that, and I want to make sure the largest community of my people, the Mixteco people, it's Oxnard, California. Most of the people work on strawberry fields. 25,000 of us in one county. The reality for people in my community there is that not only do we not have enough food, but also there's a lot of illnesses that come from not having enough nutrition. So I wanna be careful how we think about that.
And your theory works, but the reality is we don't have access to land to grow the food. We don't have access to water the food. Nef told us beautifully why people are coming here. And so your theory is right, but the reality is when I said earlier I wondered if I keep my son alive, and I think about Black Lives Matter, but more black people die from food-related preventable disease every day than are shot by the police. And so I think our work is really focused on getting us to a place where we don't need vitamins or supplements or prescribed medications, but that is going to take, some engagement. And I want to challenge you. I want you to think of a thing that you can do. Because, first of all, I'm not mad at white people. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of the system. But I have fine relationships with people in general. I have better relationships with white people who recognize their whiteness and who are working every day intentionally to do something. And it can be something as small as not buying Bristol strawberries because they spray women while they're in the field who are pregnant and their babies are sick. It can be about talking about and asking the question, why did I, as a black woman with two advanced degrees, have more preterm miscarriages than white women with 8th grade educations? And how is that related to the environment and to food in the places that we live? So find your piece of low-hanging fruit that you can chew on. And it may just be not buying the strawberries today. And tomorrow it will be something bigger than that. And if you belong to a co-op, it will be asking your co-op not to stock those strawberries. It'll be finding out where your food comes from. And if you have a CSA or you stop at a farm stand, ask them who they employ and ask them what they pay them. And choose another farm stand, because there are good farmers who are paying higher wages. Just coming to conferences and learning about it and then deciding you're going to do better when you're out in the field is not enough, because you're alive today and you can do something today. It's making sure that when you want to go work at a place and you want to do an internship or you have a question, that you remember what we talked about today and that you do it in a way that honors the work that is happening. And we want you to get something from it, but you can't just be extractive, right? And tell your stories and talk to your classmates and talk to your professors.